Hi everyone, it's Kris Hicks, Head of Press Communication at UKIP. I'm here with UKIP member Carl Benjamin. We're talking about the issues of the day. The next thing is certainly race discrimination in the police, what they call so-called positive race discrimination in the police. We understand they're actually turning away white applicants to the police force in London. What exactly is going on here, Carl?
Okay, so this is the perfect example of what I've been saying for years. There is no such thing as positive discrimination without there being negative discrimination. And the question is only which side are you going to positively and then negatively discriminate against. And in previous eras that we would completely agree is unacceptable, black or non-white people would have been discriminated against and white people would have been discriminated in favour of. And that's utterly unacceptable because of the principle that racial discrimination is wrong. It should be the best person for the job, obviously. Well, we find ourselves now in a very progressive era where the tables have just been turned. Now it's acceptable to racially discriminate against white people and in favour of non-white people. And I oppose that for exactly the same reasons that I would have opposed the reverse. It's just wrong. So this week, a man from Cheshire called Matthew Furlong, who was a very, very well-educated astrophysicist, had a degree in astrophysics, wanted to follow in his father's footsteps in what was his dream job to become a police officer. And he was rejected on the grounds of his race, gender, and sexuality. This is what Sky have to say, and this is just staggering, in my opinion. He applied to join in 2017. He passed the interview stage. He's 25 years old, and he was told, quote, "It was refreshing to meet someone as well prepared as yourself, and that he could not have done any more." He studied particle physics at Lancaster, and he has won an employment tribunal case which found that Cheshire police had discriminated against him on the grounds of his sexual orientation, race and sex. They ruled that the force had used positive action where steps are taken to recruit specific groups in a discriminatory way, saying his lawyer said Matthew was denied his dream job simply because he was white, heterosexual and male. Precisely what we've been saying was going to happen all the way through, and now we have it confirmed by a court. And
I just wonder, how the police can actually justify this at a time when we have a shortage of police officers. We have the lowest amount of police officers actually on the beat today. We've seen a refocus from the police on policing online discourse rather than actually being on the street. We're seeing, surges in attacks on police officers. Being a policeman, policewoman in the United Kingdom, certainly in London, is now more dangerous really than it's ever been. When able-bodied people are coming who are clearly suitable and intelligent enough to become policemen and policewomen in this country, we're actively turning them away because they're Caucasians. I mean, this is just absolutely mad.
So one of the first things, it's totally mad. But one of the first things I think that we should be specific. It was that he was English, right? I don't think that we should allow them to define the terms that we use in the conversation. It's because he's white English, not necessarily Caucasian or something. It's English, This is anti-English discrimination that's happening. But this bit that really, it got my goat because I am a true believer in meritocracy, and the reason that this even came to light, as they say here, had he not been such an exceptional candidate, they may not have suspected that anything was wrong and that this was unlawful and unacceptable, and it would have been allowed to continue because they just wouldn't have known. It would have been, well, I mean, he's almost as good as, or about as good as the other candidates. How do you know how they're selecting? But this guy was clearly head and shoulders above the rest, totally well motivated, and someone else with inferior qualifications got it. But this is the sort of thing, I mean, like, there are doubtless dozens, if not hundreds, and who knows how many other cases of this happening, where people aren't as exceptional, and so we can't see quite as clearly as that this is the case. And it's in this context that I think it's most concerning that, as The Guardian reports, Sarah Thornton, who they describe as a police leader, is calling for laws to allow positive racial discrimination, because obviously in this country, you're not allowed. I mean, these anti-discrimination laws go back to like the 70s. We've had this for decades where you can't make your hiring practices based on race or gender or extraneous characteristics like that. And we actually have one of the leaders of the police force calling for a change in these laws so we can enshrine legal racial discrimination for the police. And I mean, I am just so dead set against this. I don't even know how to describe it.
No, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the specifics of this law then, I mean, if they're talking about specifying certain races for certain jobs, are they then implying that you can then specify any particular race? Are you is then a company able to say, well, we only want white people? Or
Actually, yes, it would specifically mean necessarily that it was specific races, because the whole point behind this is to try and make the police force look identical to the communities over which it has to police. And so yes, if you had a majority black area, then yeah, hiring like East Asian Muslims is not going to be the same as hiring people with a Caribbean heritage or something like that. So they would have to specifically choose racial characteristics from among a particular population. So they would actually have to do that, yeah. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to have a representative police force. Otherwise, you'd have like, Bangladeshis, ruling over Cameroon immigrants or something like that. And that wouldn't be representative. So by their own logic, they are going to have to choose specific racial groups that they would be willing to hire in particular contexts.
I mean, this just sounds to me like the imposition of an apartheid within the police force. I mean, black police officers for black areas, but white police officers for white areas.
How else do you describe it?
Well, quite. And I mean, well, what happens then in terms of kind of inter-community relationships and all of that? I mean, you are building a social wall between those communities. I mean, if anything, in terms of aiding a community, making it feel safe, and in terms of building bridges, the police, can and do play a role in that. But I mean, if you're limiting the daily experience of people in any particular community or the police force with people entirely and only of their own background, well, surely then you're actually attacking the basis of a multicultural society.
Well, this comes down to the fundamental problem of multiculturalism, which is ultimately you do have to segregate people to protect a culture from change, because it's a culture's interaction with another culture that makes them both change, and they both adopt certain parts, and things things become different. But if you want to preserve cultures, then you do have to be protectionist, and then you need hate speech laws, you need specifically like community areas and things like this, and you effectively have to keep them segregated, and that's not the future that I want to go into. And this is all, again, I know I keep hammering this point, but I mean, she literally said that the police had made huge progress, but unconscious bias was still something that existed in the police force. I mean,
it's interesting how they're able to actually measure this unconscious bias, considering it's actually unconscious.
Okay, so an unconscious bias test is you sit for about 10 minutes with two sets of faces, and you have positive and negative words, and they measure the time it takes you to click on one face or another in response to whatever the instructions on the screen. And it's your reaction time that they're measuring. And they assume that if you react slowly to a black person, for example, then you have a bias against that. But I don't really know how they come to the conclusion that that's proof of a bias against or for. I mean, if you're acting slow to one and quick to another, does that mean you like the other one, or does it mean you hate the other one? And another thing is the professors who developed the implicit bias tests have already retracted what's being done with the tests themselves, because the activists are misinterpreting what these results even show. Because, as I said, you can't really be sure that that's what you're seeing. But this does go to show the remarkable influence of intersectionality over our police force. And we see this with the gay pride police and all of these other, I mean, like, what was it, Huddersfield Police the other day saying that they won the Muslim Community Awards or something for being the most diverse. And naturally, the memes all over the internet were that coupled next to a picture of a Huddersfield grooming gang that have been operating for years. The police priorities are totally out of whack, and they are operating from the perspective of the extreme far left. But the thing that annoys me the most about it is that, I mean, are they even asking these communities if that's something that bothers the communities? Because if you're a migrant to Britain from Pakistan or wherever, you came to Britain with the implicit assumption that Britain, you knew, was a country full of white people. white English, white Scottish, white Welsh. You knew that was the case. So when you came over, you knew that their army, their police force, their fire department, their government is going to be filled with white native people. You didn't see that as a problem when you came here. Why are we acting like these communities have a problem with it now? They knew explicitly that that was going to be the case, that the police officers that policed them would be white. Why is it a problem? You know, and you can't really explain that it's a problem without using intersectionality. And I don't even agree that that's an accurate way of viewing the world.
So we found really, I mean, it's purely ideological, it's a racist policy and it's built on junk science.
And it's actively discriminating against the native people of Britain illegally.
This is something we really need to keep an eye on, and I'm sure UKIP will be totally opposed to any policy that may be pushed through the government.
Absolutely. I can't see anyone in UKIP supporting a racial policy. I mean, that's absurd.